this is Helen Drew and welcome to today's watercolour project, and this is what we're going to be working on today. So I've called this scene Stormy Skies. So you can see there's a lot of dark in this area here, there's a dark bit here, and we've got a light part of the sky there. So it's a very easy project to draw. So we'll take our frame, and the reason we draw a frame is so we get our composition in the frame. But don't forget, when you paint outside the frame. When you paint outside the frame, it gives you choices, so you can perhaps move it one way or the other. Cropping the painting is very important, and often when you look at a painting and you think, don't quite like that one, try cropping it or making your frame a little bit smaller or moving it around, and you'll be surprised, it will look a lot better. So what we're going to do is very simple composition, and as we said, we've got sky. So the sky is the important part in this composition, and so what we're doing is we're going to make more sky than the foreground. So generally what we want to do is don't draw the foreground so it takes up half the painting. If you've got a dramatic sky, it should take up at least 2/3 of the painting. In the opposite way, if you're going to do a very simple sky and a very complicated foreground, then it should take up about 1/3 of the painting and 2/3. So make sure that you've got the largest area of your composition for the bit that's going to be dramatic. And all we need to do is take it down here and draw quite an interesting, don't just draw a straight line that goes straight across, but make it nice, interesting there, and then we can draw some different rocks in here. But as I say, very easy, don't need to do anything very complicated. Just make sure that when you draw a line it doesn't come off at the corners. And then we're going to make that bit, because that bit, if you notice, doesn't come in the middle, so this is the bit that I want to be the focal point of the painting. Then the next thing we do is, of course, look at colours, and the colours I've chosen for this composition today are yellow ochre. You could use raw sienna instead. The reason I'm not using raw sienna, which is a colour I normally use, is I've changed to a different brand, and the raw sienna that is in this brand, which is Magello, is quite orange, so I've gone back to using yellow ochre. I've got Payne's Grey. Payne's Grey is a bluey black. I've got some burnt sienna, which is a dirty red, and I've got some ultramarine blue. So those are the 4 colours I'm going to use, and these are the colours that I've put in the palette here. So the first thing we're going to do is put a very pale wash of raw sienna or yellow ochre on the sky. So I'm going to put a dirty brush, that's not good. Just help with clean brushes to start with. So clean water in here, because we want a very pale wash, this one, and then we'll put in it's quite a warm yellow, and test it, and that's a bit, I'm going to add a tiny bit of, make it a little bit warmer. Okay, good. So that's about, I hope you can see that, that's about the colour that you want. And then what we're going to do is we're going to paint quite a large area. So I'm going to paint the whole of this down to, and even it doesn't matter if we go down into these foreground rocks, but we do need to have enough So there is nothing worse than getting halfway through painting something and then finding you haven't got enough paint mixed up, because what's happening at that stage is while you're mixing up more, this is drying, and then you can have unpredictable results. This is when you get cauliflowers or strange things happening. So do make sure you've got enough paint. And what we're going to do is just paint with clean water all over the top part. Going down, as I said, doesn't matter if you go down into these rocks, do make sure that it's all completely dampened. And you might see on there, I'm using quite a rough paper at this stage, so I'm using an arch that's rough. Paper makes a huge difference to your painting, and quite often you buy a pad of paper and you've got to the end of the pad and then you think, oh, I like this one now. So once you've found a paper you like, then stick with it for a while. Now it's wet, it's shiny, but it's not got pools of water. Then what I'm going to do is put on the yellow. Now I've put water on, so the yellow that I've mixed is going to mix with the water here, so it will be lighter. And then using your biggest brush, paint over. Perfect. Good, so the next stage is we have to dry that off, and so I'm going to dry it off now with the hairdryer, and I'll be back when the painting is completely dry. Good, you can see now that the paper is dry, and when I say dry, I mean completely flat. When your paper is wet, first you'll see a shine on it. Then the shine will disappear and the paper will go matte, but you'll still be able to tell that your paper is damp because there will be ripples in the paper. So at this stage you need to make sure that your paper is absolutely flat. If there are any ripples in your paper, you will get unpredictable results, and that might be good, but in this case, let's try and avoid that. So what I've done now is I've mixed up quite a dark and quite a lot. You can see how much I've got here. This is Payne's Grey, and it's really quite dark. So what we're going to do now is we're going to paint with as big a brush as you've got, and you want to make sure that you've got as much paint in your brush as you can put in, and sweep across the sky. This may look scary, to about 1/3 of the way down. And then what we do is we wash our brush out completely, and we touch the bottom of the paint with the brush quite flat. You find you've got the puddle at the bottom, don't dab it off with the tissue. Take your brush and take the paint out with the brush. Add a bit more in here, and then tip your board up so it's at an angle. Soften that bit off right there. There we go. See, we're getting some nice cloud effects. And I'm tipping the board up. Add a few little white bits in here. Perhaps get rid of those. Add a bit more dark at the top. Add a bit of blue in here. Keep an eye on this while it's doing this. Okay, so you don't want the paint to come too far into this section here. So if it's coming right down into your mountains, then just sweep it off. Take the paint off the brush and just sweep it off with the dry brush. Okay, move your board around. There's no reason you have to keep your boards in one place all the time. A bit more in here. Here. Think about doing nice diagonals. Right, okay, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry that again, and I'll be back in a minute. Good, so we've got it's dry now. Now I would really recommend that you don't dry it with a hairdryer. Just let it dry naturally. The reason for that is we've got quite a lot of pigment on there. It's moving around. As you can see, I've stapled my paper to my board, but my paper is still buckling slightly. And when your paper buckles, the paint will all go into the part that's lowest. So at least if you dry it, let it dry by hand, you can move your board around, and so your paint is going where you want it to go. If you dry it with a hairdryer, it will dry the edges of the paint first, and you might get some quite interesting effects, or you might not. So let it dry naturally. So we're ready for the next stage now. I'm going to start painting the foreground. So I'm going to start with some burnt sienna here, and this has got to be really thick, so almost no water on this section here. And then again, touch the bottom with clean water and just let it blow in. So you've now got different tones in there. So a little bit. So now I'm going to add a little bit of blue in there. That's a bit too much blue. Think in diagonals. Just make sure you do have a nice interesting line there. A little bit red, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue in there just to knock it back a bit. See how there's some nice textures coming in here, and I'll add a little bit of blue to the bottom to make it a bit greener. Don't overthink it. You've got some little white bits in there, that's quite good. And then if you want to take a bit of paint out of here, just put a bit of water in here, and you couldn't do nothing wrong on this bit. Take a little bit of paint out, just give it a bit of texture. So we want all the dark area here. So you can already see that with the white area of the sky and these dark hills here, this is your focal point. Okay, so I'm going to dry it again now. It's still quite wet, so move it around. So I'm going to dry it again now, and then we'll carry on with the next section. Good, so it's dry again, and I'm going to show you a couple of techniques. You can see we've got some really nice colours in here, but not a lot of definition. So I've got a scalpel here, or you can use a knife like this. I'm going to use this scalpel, and I'm going to actually scrape out paper. Now be a bit careful as you're doing this. You don't want to scrape through to the bottom of through the whole paper. So you're just going to take the top surface off, and then you can see. Yeah. Good. And the second technique, you need clean water, and you need a piece of kitchen paper, and take the paint out. A little bit more texture. You can already see that you're getting a lot more texture in the painting here. Depending on the colours you choose, and we've used the ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue will come out really easily, so it's a non-staining colour, and you have to be a little bit careful with ultramarine blue, otherwise it really will depart. So what I'm going to do is just add with a finer brush a few bits of finer than that. A few little squiggles in here and some foliage. You'll notice that as I come off the edges of the paper, it's not too dark. You don't want to have a very dark line going off the edge. In fact, I'm going to soften that bit off a bit. Otherwise, instead of your eye going to the centre of interest, which is here, your eye will be going to the edge of the paper. Okay, and the last thing, and it should be dry by now. So you can leave it like this. The last technique I want to show you is, and perhaps test this on paper, on a piece of scrap paper first. So you take your dark and you take a big brush. So this is the brush I'm using, and one stroke, that's the effect you want. So I want, the storm is coming from here, so I'm going to put my brush here and stroke. There. It just gives you a little bit of extra dimension in your storm. If it's too much, just take a little bit out. Okay, so I think we're ready now to put our frame on. And there you go, a hill in the storm. Thank you for listening, and as always, please send me your photographs of the work you're doing. Several of you have been doing this now, thank you very much, and keep painting, keep happy.